Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and it's time for a review of the third album by Julian Casablancas and the Voidz, or just the Voidz, called Like All Before You. This is one of my most anticipated albums of the year. A life-changing, a very formative band for me, of course, were The Strokes. I think in high school I listened to nothing but Is This It, Room on Fire, and First Impressions of Earth for like a year. And I always felt alone in absolutely loving those mid-career albums as well. Angles, Come Down Machine. I think some of my favorite Strokes tracks come from those albums, but they're also very consistent from front to back. And I always kind of suspected, but it's been confirmed just by listening to interviews with the band early on that Julian Casablancas was really the X factor of the Strokes. You know, he was really in the compositional driver's seat, and a lot of his demos ended up being very closely followed on those first albums. And his solo album, Phrases for the Young, just added evidence on top of that argument because it's the best solo album to come out of the band, and it's just a wonderfully strange and euphoric synth pop trip. If you haven't heard that record before, you love the Strokes, I can't recommend it enough. My love affair just continued on 2014's debut album from Julian's new band, The Voidz. It was called Tyranny, and it's really a sleeper pick for one of my top 10 albums of the decade. I'd definitely throw it up there. No other Strokes side project put as much distance between them and the band that once was. I mean, it was complete lunacy. Trip hop, afro pop, industrial music, some tropicalia, some crunchy, jagged riffs, some retro 80s TV and radio samples. Experimental rock in the truest sense. It really had it all, but most importantly, it had Julian's vocal presence and his uncanny sense of melody and songcraft. The reckless raw power continued on that second album, Virtue. I mean, this was so far from the what you see is what you get kind of leather jacket rock and roll of Is This It. The Voidz cemented themselves as something much more ambiguous, much more mysterious, and chronically online. Somehow Virtue just expanded the genre palette to even new territories, and it's not an album I return to very often. I think it's a little bit hit and miss compared to Tyranny, but there are some real treasures to dig up on Virtue, and it was a ton of fun just going back to it in the last couple days. And 6 years later, a pushing 50-year-old Julian and his gang of ironically dressed miscreants jumps back on the saddle for Like All Before You. The opening track just really had me excited about this one. I feel like it was kind of cinematic and made me feel like another Human Sadness was coming. Weirdly, it kind of reminds me of Watcher in the Skies by Genesis, you know, that Mellotron intro that just is all kinds of epic. But then the second track, Square Wave, comes in, and it's like the band has this postmodern irony button, and they just bop. Square Wave has that very chintzy New Order or The Cure production style, you know, with the super stiff guitar and bass parts, the drum machine. It's definitely in line with the Strokes from a compositional perspective, but with a drum machine and auto-tune vocals. Like many points on Virtue, I feel like it lacks the intensity and the drama of Tyranny and kind of goes toward a almost ironic and kind of just flashy production. I'm not crazy about the track, but I can appreciate the strange sonic juxtapositions. You know, that's always been a big part of the Voidz sound. And the chorus is signature Julian, just a beautiful melody, if not a little derivative of past Stroke songs. Prophecy of the Dragon keeps up the cheap drum machine sound, but this time throws in this pretty silly thrash metal guitar riff. Again though, it drops into a super catchy chorus with the same kind of dreamy haziness of the first track. Just writing wise, I don't hate it. It's pretty catchy, it's intriguing, it's not the simplest of chord structures, which I really appreciate. Sick solo, but the bizarre production choices are a little bit over the top for me at times. a little off-putting. Seven Horses goes down a little bit smoother with some chill reggae and some country western lyrical metaphors. That's something Julian's done since Ludlow Street on the solo album. You know, Julian's been going country for years. Spectral Analysis, the 5th track, stopped me in my tracks. That synth piano, the synth tones and the arpeggios are breathtaking. Seriously, they just pull at the ducts, you know? Julian's vocal is lovely as well. It's heavily processed and dark lyrically, but oh so beautiful. I just cannot get enough of this sound. Flexorcist, the next song, returns to the 80s obsession, reminds me a little bit more of Julian's solo album, but if it were on that album, it'd probably be my least favorite track. It's fun, but a little safe, a little lightweight, and I feel much the same on All the Same, which totally understandable choice for a single. It's very much the most immediate and accessible track here, but yeah, just kind of goes down too easy for me. And the other tracks here, Perseverance and When Will the Time of These Bastards End, yeah, just don't really get them. Even more lightweight, in my opinion. They do strike me as pretty half-baked ideas that just really pale in comparison to so much of Julian's other music. It does seem like they're a little stretched to find enough material for this album, whereas the other albums were just overflowing. There was an overabundance of ideas, and yeah, this one at 42 minutes is like 15 or 20 minutes shorter than the other two albums, and even with those instrumental intro and outro tracks. Maybe they thought like an hour is too long for an album in 2024, but guys, if you didn't think we were listening to deep cuts like Nintendo Dog, like Dare I Care, then think again. That's probably my biggest criticism of the album. It's just a little bit short, especially with a 6-year downtime. I also find some of the production choices just a little bit obnoxious and weird for weird's sake, maybe, or they just didn't land in the same way as before. Also, just a small point, but I feel like every single guitar solo on Strokes tracks and anything Julian's made is super memorable and melodic, but I don't really remember any of these. Yet, and a big yet, there are some great ideas here. There are some inventive chord progressions in places and great melodies as always from Jules. So it's not great, but it's good. Let me know what you think of this album and the Voidz. What's your favorite Voidz album of the 3 so far? Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thank you so much for watching.